Eminem's Slim Shady LP released in 1999, and since then Eminem has released #1 albums up until his latest, Kamikaze, that dropped in 2018. Even his projects with D12 and Bad Meets Evil went #1 and have sold millions of copies worldwide, and those projects on their own still dwarf the projects of many mainstream rappers. Shouldn't be too hard to drop a few names in the comment section if you know what I mean. Now back to the main point. Many try to bring Eminem down, but so far Eminem still has the most important backings that matter in the end. Many industry veterans consider him to be one of the greatest. He has the biggest backing from music fans and a global fan base that is a force to reckon with, and this has ensured that the facts remain on his side. With these three qualities, discrediting Eminem at this point can only be based on delusions or simply one going against the grain to stir things up. The latter we've seen more of recently, and even unknown rappers trying to come up these days mention Eminem to gain some clout. Now, so far in the 21st century, Eminem has sold more albums than any other artist in the United States, with pure sales of over 45 million albums sold in the United States alone. Over 32 million albums sold in the 2000s decade, and in the current decade, 13 million albums sold. Now these are pure sales and shouldn't be confused with equivalent sales, which is a marketing buzzword really, since equivalent sales include track downloads and streams that are converted using a formula which has already changed several times since this model was adopted. It's also important to add that equivalent sales vary depending on the country, which makes it a complicated mess as there is no single global standard. Now, even based on equivalent sales, other artists of the 21st century still do not surpass Eminem's 45 million plus pure sales so far, which puts Eminem as the clear winner so far this century in the United States, even if you compare his pure sales to the equivalent sales of other artists. So regardless of how a critic might try to spin it, Eminem comes out on top. In the current decade alone for pure sales, Eminem comes out as third overall and on top as the male artist of the decade, and including streams, Eminem drops down one spot to become the fourth artist overall and second male artist of the current decade. Now, the mainstream media, for the most part, seem to believe that because they do not publish positive news about Eminem, Eminem is now washed up and irrelevant, but as you can see, the facts suggest otherwise. I kept track of when the IFPI published the list of best-selling albums globally in 2018, and Eminem's Kamikaze album was the top hip-hop album of the year. But guess what? The mainstream media in general and mainstream hip-hop websites ignored the news because it was Eminem, and this is a case of burying their head in the sand. They seem to think that if they don't publish the news, then it didn't happen, and this works wonders with your typical audience. But that's why ETLifestyle as it is today exists. Artists of the current decade, even with the inclusion of equivalent sales, still fall short of Eminem's 2000s numbers. And as tracking for this decade ends this year, Eminem, even with equivalent sales to spare, remains the top artist of the 21st century, 20 years in. Now, in terms of hip-hop music alone, you see how Eminem is far ahead in this century in the United States. I'm sure even the biggest hater is impressed deep down, but the United States is still fair game, as outside the United States the gap between Eminem and other rappers is even farther. Some of the most successful rappers in the United States remain relatively unknown outside the country, especially for the new wave of rappers, since the world is yet to accept the new wave of hip-hop. In 2018, for instance, only one hip-hop album made the global top 10, and even 2017 was more impressive, with 2 hip-hop albums in the global top 10. What are your thoughts? Tell us below, subscribe if you haven't, and see you in the next video.